I'm very excited to join this incredible group of women. I am thrilled to be able to just literally ask them a few questions. This program today is about, the role that women have played in architecture, but more specifically, it's a design talk about challenges they face and opportunities they have had as professionals in a male-dominated field. I think this is an interesting conversation as we're like literally on the, I don't know if it's the heels or toes of Women's History Month, and you all are probably going to be very popular. I'm very popular during Black History Month, and so I know you'll be very popular in this month, given the incredible work you've done. But I'd like to say that I also know you to be extremely popular every time of the year because of the great thinking and design work that you've done. My job is not to read your bios. I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to say your names, introduce each of you, and then maybe in that order, you all just come up in quick succession and share a bit about your own practice. I always find that funny when someone introduces someone, not like Robert, but you guys are artists. And so I really appreciate that Robert shared a few things about me, but as artists, I'd like for you to say something about your own work and practice rather than me. So, Isabel Castilla is principal at James Corner Field Operations. And then we also have Liz Diller, the legendary Liz Diller, who is a partner at Diller Scofidio Renfro. And then we have Paula Scher, graphic designer at Pentagram. All of these folks are just so amazing and illustrious. I should say that about all of them. And then we also have Lisa Switkin, who was mentioned earlier, as a senior principal at James Corner Field Operations. Not only am I on the board of the High Line, but I'm also on the board of the Friends of the Waterfront in Seattle. And so I have loved these kinds of projects across the world and across the country, but I also feel really thrilled to be taking an 11-acre parcel of land here in Los Angeles and turning it into a park from a parking lot. And so I want to hear about you all, and I know that the people that are signed on today want to hear a bit about your practice so that we can delve into these critical questions. So Isabel, would you mind starting?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's presentation. My name is Isabel Castilla. I am a principal at James Corner Field Operations, where I've been working as a landscape architect and urban designer for the past 14 years. I have also worked very closely with Friends of the High Line on the design, leading the day-to-day design and construction for the last two portions of the High Line, Section 3 Phase 1 and Section 3 Phase 2, or the Spur. But in addition to working on the High Line, I've also worked on a number of other projects across the US, two of which have either just opened or are about to open that I'm very excited to showcase today. The first one that we see on the screen, this is a rendering of Weston Square in Dallas. Weston Square is a future park that will be a little bit short of an acre that will transform an existing surface parking lot into this neighborhood's first public park. It is located on the West End district, which is the historic district of Dallas. So aesthetically and architecturally, the project really seeks to blend with its historic surroundings. But from a performative aspect, the project seeks to also be a smart park that celebrates Dallas, basically positioned today as one of the cities that leads innovation in technology. So the project itself has a lush garden interior composed of native plants, and then a trellis that surrounds its edges that will work as a technological armature, controlling all of the smart systems that will make sure the park is extremely progressive from a technology standpoint, but also uses technology as an amenity for the park itself, providing Wi-Fi, charging stations, and a number of other elements for the community, which on a day like today, where we all are working remotely, will be a very welcome benefit and feature. Weston Square is looking to open in less than 3 weeks. But another project I've been working on for the past six years is the Underline Park in Miami, Florida. The Underline coincidentally opened its first phase to the public last Monday, and it is part of the Highline Network. It is one of those transformative public open spaces that seeks to transform the area located underneath the elevated metro rail that crosses 10 miles across Miami into a pedestrian and bicycle path. It looks to populate it with native gardens along its entire 10-mile length to ensure it is also a habitat for local birds and butterflies, and also is populated with a number of rich amenity spaces, mostly designed and derived from a very extensive community process, such as this basketball court that we see here. So I'm very excited to join you all on this talk and really discuss, our position of women within these very transformative urban projects that are coming up across cities across the US today.
Thank you. Liz, would you like to share your screen as well? You're muted. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, everything that could go wrong. I somehow shut myself off just when you were introducing everyone, so I'm glad I was able to get back. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen and here we go. And I'll just say a couple of words about my studio. Okay, you're gonna see my awful desktop. Okay, so just a couple of words about me and my studio. I'm the founding partner, one of the two founding partners of Diller Scofidio and Renfro, and we are an interdisciplinary studio at the intersection of architecture, planning, public realm, an emphasis on the public realm, public art in all media, performance, and pretty much everything. I'm also an academic. I'm a professor of architecture at Princeton University, and I was asked for a brief background for how I got into the field of architecture. So for me, it happened incidentally. I was not interested at all. I wanted to become a filmmaker, but I was always interested in issues of space, the conventions of space, breaking those conventions. And I never considered architecture because my parents wanted me to be either a dentist or an architect. And I always thought that I linked them in my mind. But on the other hand, architecture just seemed very far away from my interest. It felt bankrupt intellectually and corrupt. And it wasn't until I crossed paths with John Haydock, who was a kind of cult figure at Cooper Union, did I come to understand that that I could really think and also make things at the size of buildings and even cities. Brief description of the Highline. 2004, James Corner asked if our studio could come into an architectural competition with him. And since then, we've partnered on this project also with Pete Udolph. Obviously, we won for some reason. We hit a nerve with Robert, and it was because he tells us that we sort of fought with each other while we were making a presentation, and he thought that was charming. Okay, and so we've been working on this project for all these years since 2004, since the competition. I wanted to share these, couple of images of current work. So this is, we're working currently, we do a lot of museums, and this is a little bit of a turning point. The Victoria and Albert Museum has asked us to do a storage building for them that could become a kind of research center and an open archive, an open collection. This is in Queen Elizabeth Park in London, the Olympic Park. And it's a consolidation of the V&A's facilities. So this will be a purpose-built home for, and this is just like what goes on behind the scenes, which I love. It's more interesting than curated shows. And so it will be a home for about 250,000 objects, about 350,000 books, and about 1,000 archives from the V&A's collection of fashion and textiles, furniture, theater, performance, painting, sculpture, and even architectural fragments. There's a piece of the Frankfurt kitchen sticking out there. Okay, and another project which is current is another museum, very different type of museum for us. It's the new Museum of Transport. It's in Budapest, and it's on a 7-hectare railway yard in a redeveloping brownfield area, a former industrial site. That will be the home of this historic collection of transportation, including trains, buses, trolleys, trams, cars, boats, locomotives, steam engines, bicycles, motorcycles, everything, especially trains. And this was won on a competition. Also, most of our work is won by competition. And you could see these trains. Now, the theme of this whole thing is the ground. These are all ground transport, mostly. And some of these trains are now situated someplace between public space and leaving the museum itself. So this is very much in progress. And I'm going to stop sharing here and then turn it back. So those are two of the many projects.
Thank you, Liz. Paula.
Okay. Just to explain who I am and what I do, I'm a principal of Pentagram Design, which is a very large design consultancy made up of 25 principals who all own the firm equally. And at the time I joined, I was the only woman partner among 16 people. Now I have 5 other women partners, 4 in New York, actually 6. There's another one I forgot to count, and 2 in London. The firm is probably, if we were going to describe ourselves, though we work in all forms of discipline, we're an identity firm. And most of my work is centered around identity. As a matter of fact, I met Robert when he was a marketing director. And after I met him on a project that I wanted to get, which sounded very lucrative, he came around and asked me to design the Highline logo for him in around 2000 or 1998. I don't remember quite what year. And it was a free job. And so I designed it for him because I wanted to get this other project, which I never got, but I've been working for the Highline ever since. The work I do is broad-based. You know it, you live with it. I've designed the identity for the New York Shakespeare Festival and Public Theater, for the New York City Ballet, for the Metropolitan Opera, the Philadelphia Museum, corporate projects like Citibank and Shake Shack and a lot of things for a long period of time. I've been a partner at Pentagram for 30 years. I'm also very obedient to briefs. And the brief I got for this project was that I should show 2 things I'm working on, except for as an identity designer, you're not allowed to show 2 things. You're not allowed to show anything you're working on because nobody wants their logo revealed until it's revealed. So you can't show pieces of architecture or anything like that. I could show you a little side view of a piece of typography, I suppose. So what I thought I'd share is something that I'm working on personally, which I think I can share. I paint large scale maps. You see one behind me. I actually painted a map of the Highline once, which was small scale. And recently I was commissioned to paint somebody's Porsche. And it was this 1977 Porsche. And I've been doing this in my basement in Salisbury, Connecticut, where I've been living. And I thought I'd show you some pictures of it. It's a German collector and a German car, but it's a map of the United States. You're looking at the front end here, and the map is painted all over the thing. Let's see, I think I got another shot of it. Oh yeah, here's a shot of me working on it. Let me see if I can get this up at full screen mode.
We're not seeing it, Paula. Are you sharing?
Yeah. You didn't see either?
No.
No, I think you have to share screen. I
Oh,
think
I
you
got
might have just like made your PowerPoint full screen.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I did. I failed at this.
I did the same thing this morning, so.
All right. Well, here it's coming. You see it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let me see if I
Wow.
can, I want to get it up full screen, but my full screen thing went away. Oh, there it is. There's view. Enter. There you go. No, it's not doing it.
We
There you
can
go.
see it fine, just so you know.
Oh, okay. So I'll go to
Yeah.
the other shot. The other shot's a close-up of the front end. If you look at the blue that's sticking out under me, and if you wonder what I'm wearing on my back, it's a back brace because when I bend down low, this thing kills me. And the car is up on jacks. And I've never painted anything quite like this. And so Texas is wrapping around the side. And currently I'm on Louisiana. I've sort of moved down the side of the car. But the front end of the car is very complete. Let me just get out of here. Exit full screen. Let's see if I can find the other shot. Yeah. No, that's the same shot, right? No, this is a different shot. View. This is another view. You see it more from the side. And there should be a third shot that's the front end of the car. Let me see if I can find that. I feel very disorganized here.
So we're only seeing that same shot of you on the car painting or leaning on the car painting. So we haven't seen the other shots.
Well, I'm doing.
But it's super impressive, Paula. It already made a splash.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so thank you so much. Would you mind unsharing your screen? And then I'm going to ask Lisa to step in here and share a bit of her work. Thank you so much, Paula.
I'm going to do it.
I can't wait to see that on the street somewhere.
Well, you got to go to Germany, I'm afraid. Let me see.
Yeah.
Get out, leave. What am I doing? Leave.
I think you're out.
You did. You already did it. You're all, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, great. I'll be
Lisa?
brief because I know that we want to get to the questions. So I'm a senior principal at James Corner Field Operations. I've really helped James start the firm nearly 21 years ago. And you know, I came into landscape architecture. I had an undergraduate degree in urban design and planning. I was also had a focus on community activism and community development plans. I actually worked as a liaison with the community for the first phase of Hudson River Park in New York before it had even opened, and got excited and learned what landscape architecture was. And so since then, I've really devoted my time to and efforts all to the practice and to fostering this kind of connection between public space, community, ecology, nature, all of those things which sort of come together in the public realm. And I, like Liz, have been on the High Line since 2004, 17 years. Can't even believe it. It's kind of shocking. And have, you know, a really long and intimate relationship with the High Line going back that whole time. And my role has evolved actually from the beginning when I was one of the designers that would stay up all night and draw to my role now. So it's really fun to sort of be part of that evolution. And I will share my screen as well. I just wanted to show, make sure you guys can see that, yes? Just wanted to show a couple projects that I'm working on. And many of these projects have to do with really transforming, I think, the way New Yorkers interact with the rivers, which is really exciting. When I first started in New York, it was rethinking the edges and even the waterfront sites. And now we're trying to actually rethink, you know, the rivers and how we sort of are living next to water and how we do that. So this is River Ring, a project in Brooklyn. And it's really meant to be a new model for urban shorelines that really bolsters co-benefits. So there's cutting edge open space, there's private investment in resiliency infrastructure. You're seeing these large breakwaters out in the water that dramatically reduce wave energy to increase resilience, but also allow for safe water recreation. The next project is very near to the High Line, of course. This is Gansevoort Peninsula. It's one of the last large remaining piers in the Hudson River Park. And this is under construction, so it will be Manhattan's first official beach. There were many actually when Battery Park City was being filled in. And there's also a salt marsh as well as a large playing field and many other kind of amenities in this. And then lastly, well, I have not been deeply involved in this project. It's one that's been very close to our office and that I am, of course, involved in a sort of very higher level. And it's also one of the Highline Network projects. So this is the Presidio Tunnel Tops in San Francisco. And this is just meant to show that it's sort of, this is the earth sort of forming. There's a large bore tunnel that's going underneath, and it will be the first time that the Presidio, which is actually very much segregated from both the bay and the surrounding neighborhoods, really becomes stitched together. And as part of that, it's kind of fun just to see those views taking shape. It's an incredible vista. There'll be paths, trails, a kind of new learning landscape that we're really excited about that really fosters nature education with children. These are just some of sneak peeks of some of the cool elements that are being designed as part of that learning landscape.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You know what's really interesting? I grew up in San Francisco, and so I know that site very well. And it's amazing to see the transformation of something that was kind of a hanging chad for the city, if you will. For so many of us, it wasn't a place that we explored extensively, but certainly around the periphery of it was something that we explored a lot. So, wow, that's incredible. So I'm just going to jump right in, and so I asked before getting on the call, like, why do you guys want to have this call? And, like some people aren't really interested in gender-based dialogues anymore, and so perhaps we could just have that conversation. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is that while we're trying to move past those issues, as well as issues of associated with certain kinds of behaviors that kind of diminish diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and truly a sense of belonging. We do find ourselves constantly in those kinds of spaces. So this conversation was billed as talking about women in architecture and design, and gender as a part of the discussion. How do you see gender intersecting with other parts of identity, in particular race, ethnicity, in your work and in these fields? You can answer that however you like. You can answer pieces of it, or you could even choose to answer a question I did not ask, because I truly am excited to find just the space for us to have this kind of conversation. So just have at it. I may jump in and ask us to move on, but I really just want to hear your thoughts about this notion of gender in the field of architecture. Anyone? It's an open dialogue. Liz, are you speaking?
I'm there.
Okay.
I'm there.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
I mean, I'll just start by saying the obvious. Architecture is a male-dominated profession and generally a male-dominated discipline, and it's probably no wonder that I was not interested in it, because I didn't think it was something I could do, but it was also a rich man's profession. You sort of had to be introduced to architectural projects somehow. They didn't just you couldn't get them. You had to sort of be awarded them somehow through your family, and I don't know, that was maybe a preconception I had. And when I went to school, there were some women, and but there were very few role models out there of women in architecture. So, it just didn't feel that accessible to me. And then as I mentioned, I sort of happened upon it. But when I think about where we are now and how I got into architecture, I am in partnership with a Black man, a gay man, and a white man, right? So we have like the full spectrum in a way. And we're a collaborative studio, and it's not dominated by one voice. And more, we're seeing less of the heroic white male. We're seeing more collaboratives. We're seeing more sort of interestingly configured groups that are, from sort of other disciplines slipping in and out of architecture. And I'm glad to see that it's sort of this image and this sort of orthodoxy of architecture as it's been portrayed in films and books, and so that's breaking down, and it's hard work, and it's very collaborative. And if I just might add that as a teacher, I see a totally gender balanced class every year. For the last decade, I've seen totally 50%, 50-50. However, it doesn't really get to the workforce. And maybe all of us will try to figure out exactly what happens between school and work, and why maybe our studios are not looking as balanced as our schools are looking.
Yeah, I mean,
I think definitely someone, Lisa, if you want to answer that, that is like at the heart of this, because basically in all of these cases, when we're talking about diversity at every level, people are saying that you all don't exist, right? That we don't exist. Like that's the question. Like really, like I can't find them. I can't find a qualified fill in the blank. So go there, Lisa. I'm really excited about what you're going to say.
I certainly can't answer that question, but I can probably inform the question. I mean, there's been some recent research specific actually to landscape architecture, which I think has a similar trend in some ways to architecture, but 55% of women graduate with their sort of MLA or BLA. So that's their master's or their bachelor's in landscape architecture, but you lose 10% right after graduation. You lose another 15% to licensure. You lose another 15% in terms of the advanced leadership and, recognition more broadly. And so that it compresses. So you might have 55% graduates of women, but there's only something like 10 to 15% who are quote unquote recognized leaders in their field. And I think it has to do with a number of factors. I mean, obviously there's a big drop off mid-career where women feel like they have to make a choice between families and their career. There's also the sort of burden and, the barrier of licensure sometimes that can be difficult, both in terms of time and money. And I also think there are probably a lot of women who are practicing, but are unnoticed for a variety of reasons. That's a start.
Okay. I was thinking while you guys were chatting about the fact that someone who I love and adore is an artist named Carrie Mae Weems. I know, Liz, you're friends with Carrie. One of the things I love about a project she did so many years ago has everything to do with architecture, but people don't talk about these photographs through the lens of architecture. And that is a project she did on Goree Island and the point of no return, which is like the exit to where slaves were onboarded onto castles, onboarded from the slave castle onto slave ships. And it's just the door of no return, like the light that comes from the water, like it's so seductive. I mean, it is really just beautiful how this very minimalist, almost brutalist in its nature kind of structure is. And I often think about, and maybe I'm just like reading into all of this because of where I work now, but the notion of narrative architecture, this idea that that architecture tells a story. I mean, I can't walk on the High Line without thinking about like the narrative of that place. I think that what you guys have done for so many years, particularly in landscape, also in terms of just design, wayfinding alone, people underestimate, and so I just want to know a little bit more about how you all feel about how that relates to. Is there a particular touch you think that women might have? Is there a particular point of view you might have about how you shape space to form a certain kind of experience or narrative, if you will? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's great.
I want to say one thing about, Paula designed the logo before there was an architectural design, before there was even like the hope of a project.
Really?
Yes, because Robert and Josh had this sort of good sense of, having a letterhead, that they could actually write a letter to the city, I mean, I don't know if he's listening and he might want to speak for himself.
He's in there, but he said he's not jumping in, but he's there listening.
No, but it's true. He said it was to give them, sort of like clout, but also he wanted to make a statement that design mattered.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Paula, you want to chime in? Wait, Paula, we can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
And they were called two guys and a business card for walking around because that's all they had, but the thing is that it was an expression of what the possibility was. And they began publishing, and there were a number of books and pieces we did way before. I think the city actually bought into it. If it was 2004, I must have already been working on it 6 years.
Yeah.
At the point that started, when we were making things to make it look like, I always tell clients that promotion matters because it makes it look like something's happening when nothing's really happening, but it may happen. And then when it happens, it fulfills the promise of the stuff that you put out there. I actually call that sort of work crapola because it sort of fills a void of the thing that's going to come, that's going to replace it.
Yeah, well, it's also sticky stuff, you know what I mean? It's the thing, like, I do remember those pictures of people from the neighborhood on the High Line. It was like all the overgrown, like wildflowers. And it just really was mind blowing. And I do remember like the pictures being that campaign being accompanied by that logo. It's so interesting. You'll love this. My godson, I said, get my keys. It's the one with the train tracks on it. He was like, you mean the one with the hashtag? Like, it's like reinventing itself all over again. I want to get Isabel's voice in here a little bit, and I would love to maybe chat a little bit about just this notion that I'm hearing as an undertone here. Paula, whether it's, you went from being the only person to, I'm sure, nurturing the enlisting of other voices, and also bringing other colleagues along in that enlisting, or being the person to partner up with someone to realize an amazing project. What is it? There's Shirley Chisholm, who was like this amazing woman who ran for president years and years ago, Black woman, first woman to run for president. She was amazing. And she says, there's a quote, she says, if there's no seat at the table, bring a folding chair. You all seem like folding chair type people, it's just kind of like, I'm going to be at the table no matter what. Isabel, maybe you could speak to that, because your projects are super significant, and just talk to some of that. What does that mean to bring yourself to the table there?
I love the way you've described it, because that completely describes my personality. In all of the projects I do, I would have to say that different from some of the stories that we're hearing on this forum, I went to school where there were mostly women in my class. I went to field operations where our leadership is mostly composed of women, Lisa being my first and foremost, a person that guided me through everything. So I did kind of had a bit of an exposure to the field, being surrounded by women. What I didn't know, what really became the challenge for me, is that working on some of these projects, which are mostly infrastructural projects, where you're turning a piece of engineering that is supposed to be a transportation corridor, whether it's the High Line or the Underline, into a park, you start getting a lot of obstacles immediately, mostly from, I would say, older men that have been engineers their entire life and cannot imagine the notion of turning some place underneath an active train into a park. And when you are the person that is the voice of the project, and you walk in a room as a young woman surrounded by very old engineers, you're just conceived as being naive. So it does force you to be extremely strong as a voice, to completely somehow ignore the fact that you are a woman and really have that strong voice to say, no, I really think I know what I'm talking about. I really think we need to challenge these notions, and I think we need to push through. And to me, that has been the bigger challenge, just dealing with the day-to-day tectonics of how to convince others to change something that was intended for one purpose, to be a public space. And I would say the biggest two ways in which I have overcome that is, one, being extremely well educated about extremely minute details, so that whenever someone would give me an excuse of, oh no, you can't do this because of this, I would know exactly how that something works, and I would try to challenge and say, I think we can think of it in another way. I think that's one aspect. And I think another aspect, going back to the notion of ethnicity, is that I am Latino. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I'm 100% bilingual. In fact, English is not my first language. And I think there's something about Latino culture that really tries to make friends with everybody and tries to develop a personal relationship beyond that professional interaction. And I think through that, whenever I found obstacles, I just really tried to to find the way around the person, find the way around the skeptical engineer, or find the way around the person that perhaps didn't want to go a step above and beyond to make things happen. And I think that's an important part of the dialogue, how some of our upbringing and some of our backgrounds also contribute to our success of interacting with others and really trying to make everybody feel like they're part of a team and push forward on some of those most challenging projects.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I think that it's wonderful that you've already started to talk about mentoring. And I think that's my next question. What role did mentoring play in your development? And do you all see yourselves as role models or mentors for people? Maybe Paula, you want to chime in here? I see you shaking your head.
I've been teaching for 37 years. I've hired my students. My students often come and work for me. Then they start their own firms and compete with me. They beat just in terms of my early experiences as a graphic designer, I was in the record industry in the 70s, and I was the senior art director at CBS Records, and I made about 150 covers a year. I was in my 20s and worked with very tough, very corrupt men. And it was interesting because I didn't expect differently. And I remember my mother, who was a school teacher, told me that being a school teacher was the best job a woman could get, and that she was proud of being a good school teacher. And I always thought, well, then people thought women made good school teachers, so maybe people could think women make good graphic designers if you walked into that kind of a terrain and managed to succeed within it. There were a group of women who I'm still friends with, which we sort of began a relationship with each other in that period of this very male-dominated system. And there was a discovery I made, which was that you could enter design competitions and people didn't necessarily read your name. They'd look at the piece and you could win. And you could win being a woman. And if you won enough, you'd get more successful, therefore more power, therefore more of an ability to succeed, and there would be more of you. And that was sort of a methodology for, I would say, the first 30 years of my career. Where I'm disappointed is that I see more, when we talked about this before, more women in the profession, but also more women who are students, and less women proportionally that are still successful than men. And I don't know why.
Well, I think that that's something that all of us in every field need to tackle. You know, it seems to cut across areas of work and sectors. Okay, I am going to not even try and make a transition here. I'm just going to ask a question because we are running out of time, and I want to open it up for a few questions from the public. But maybe I could start with you, Liz. You all work not only in New York City, but also on national and international projects, some of which you've shown. How do your experiences in the context of gender compare in other locations around the country and the world, like besides New York City?
Well, I have to say that in New York, one doesn't feel it so much. We're a very progressive place in the States. And, just going back a little bit to that mentorship question, yeah, no mentors, like there weren't not women anyway. And I was unteachable, so forget about mentoring. But some people told me I am their mentor, and I don't really even understand it because I try to screw around with people's minds and confuse them, if anything. And that I think is a good thing to, undo what they think. But, coming back to specifically this question about how New York compares to other parts, we've been working in a mostly blue states, and they're more progressively minded places where women, I'm just thinking, like where women are, it feels a little, somewhat effortless, I have to say. And maybe I'm a beneficiary of all the women that came before me, the Denise Scott Browns of this world, and the Lena Bobardis of this world, and the Ray Eameses of this world, that women that really succeeded and built, great work. But when I go, for example, to Brazil, I can see that there's mostly women in architecture, really. It's like totally dominated by women. Why? I'm not exactly sure. Well, maybe Bobardi is part of it, but there is a tremendous gravitation of women and understanding of women. On the other hand, in another extreme, I'm just thinking, when I first started, my first serious architectural project was in Japan, and it was a project that Isozaki, very famous male architect, was coordinating master planning, and he invited 4 female architects, 4 women that were running practices. And this was in 2000, and this was early for us because we were late bloomers to architecture. So it was so bizarre because women are, typically more in the background professionally. And here, and at that time, here, because there was a governor that was running for office in a dominant female community in Gifu Prefecture, it's a regional part of Japan, that he selected 4 women to do the project. One of them was Sejima, one of them was Christine Hawley and Takahashi, and these were like really strong women in architecture. And in this case, the men walked behind the women. In this case, it's the first time in a totally male-oriented professional culture where I felt that it was reversed in a kind of backwards way. It wasn't equal. It was just the same, but backwards because of the specifics of the project. So this is all to say that time changes, but also wherever we work, it's a slightly different situation. But I have to say that the world is getting more cosmopolitan, at least the big cities, that in which we get to do our work. And if they're interested in our studio's work, they would be progressively minded. And so I don't feel that problem as much as probably other women that are native to all the parts of the world that we work in feel. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Yeah, one thing I just want to jump in on, one thing that you mentioned in terms of, mentorship. I mean, I was lucky that I actually had a lot of women mentors. And in fact, I think having so many and seeing how each one of them sort of showed up in a different way, had a voice in a different way, balanced their life and work in a different way was really, important to me, because I realized there isn't one way to do it. My first female mentor was sort of like, this is what you have to do, and you have to lead like a man, and it has to be like this, and like I found that to be so like strange. I was like, why do I have to lead like a man, and what does that even mean? And, and so finding my own voice and figuring out, wait, not even I can lead like a woman necessarily, but just lead like myself. And seeing all of these different people do it in their own way was really powerful for me. And it's something I've tried to pass down to, all of like the younger generation and people that I come in contact with. And I will say that recently, some of my mentors have actually been my mentees. It's the younger generation that is starting to influence me and push me and, shift my boundaries. I don't like to sort of be too comfortable. It's part of my nature, and they're pushing me. And I find that also to be really inspiring.
Oh, that's so good. Oh man. Well, one thing I would say that on this call, many of you guys have pointed out each other's work, which I think is a mark of like really great professionalism, period. Not even gendered, but mark of professionalism. But, like Liz, you mentioned Paula's like work on the logo. Lisa, you talked about Paula's work. Somebody put Paula's work in the chat. Isabel, you mentioned Lisa and her mentorship. Liz, it's just, this is how it should be, and that behavior norm kind of needs to be paramount. But we are often taught to like behave in the space of otherness, right? We are taught to kind of behave in this gendered way. In fact, years ago, a good colleague of mine and I, Marianne Jordan, who many of you know, we worked together in Seattle, and she and I got to work on a show called Elle, Women Artists from the Louvre. And I remember interviewing a bunch of architects about their role and artists, women artists, about their role in shaping different kinds of environments. And we did these audio guides, and people were just so like diplomatic on the audio guides. And I wish I could have like made public the outtakes, the part that got left on the cutting room floor, because and in some cases we still were recording, they didn't realize it. And I sent them to some of them, which basically was just like, I don't even know why we're having this conversation. We all know what's really happening here. We all know the deal. And there was one person in architecture who said, there's been times when I've had to dress almost like a guy, to kind of be in a room. Maybe, Lisa, you're talking about kind of being yourself. And I just love to hear you all talk a little bit about some of the challenges. We've kind of taken the high road here. I would love for you all to talk a little tiny bit about some of the challenges that are faced by women in these environments. And how some of them, let's just stop there. The next question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to prompt you, the lightning round will be like, how do you define success? So I'm just going to put that in the little hopper off to the side, but maybe we can hear a little bit about some of the challenges you all have faced, because this work is not without challenges, which is why we're having this conversation. So anyone?
Well, I can talk about the difference I feel between a situation where all things are equal and a client is talking to 2 or 3 partners at the same time, and that there's a noticeable command that men have naturally that women seem to work harder for, and that it's where the eyes go, or the expectation of power in an unknown situation. If I'm in that situation and I'm a known commodity, I don't feel it. If I'm with 2 or 3 of my male partners, I always feel it, depending upon who the person is who comes in the room. And it never really changed in the 30 years I've been a partner at Pentagram. What changed is my own renown, so it happens less. But I would imagine for somebody who was starting in that situation, and I know this is true of my women partners who started it, they've all felt it. It is a thing about being able to command the room. And in any form of a creative endeavor where you're trying to teach people to see, which is what we all are doing, you need to command that kind of respect in order to be successful. And it's very difficult to obtain. And I'm very short. I always have to get people to sit down, because I stand up and I'm coming up to their waist. So it's
It's amazing. I just imagine you to be like 5'10". So just so you know.
Well,
Liz?
yeah. I was going to say that part of that is, confidence and passion in your work, right? In one's work. And when you do that, you exude it and you don't have to think much about it. But, I was thinking about, you're prompting me to think about some painful things, Sandra, which I usually sort of put behind, but, not that long ago, I was, presenting to a group of developers, a very sort of male dominant kind of locker room atmosphere almost, in a situation where I had to keep telling people to put down their cell phones, their text messaging while I was presenting. And I just would stop and say, I'm not going to proceed unless, and I was doing this with CEOs. So, but the most painful memory looking back was actually my first job in Atlanta, Georgia, where I decided to go just to get away from my parents in New York. And I was a sophomore in school, and I worked for John Portman, who's kind of this weird developer architect. And I don't know, it's a long story how I got there. But when I got there, I worked in the model shop, and every woman that was working for a man's male superior was called as their girl. So I was called Charlie's girl. And that was my first experience working in an architecture office. And, and that was like almost the first and the last, that kind of behavior. But it was such a weird turnoff. And I didn't know whether that was like partially Southern, definitely, gender biased, youth bias and everything like that. But it was, I said, fuck it, like just move on.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're going to create the conditions for that not to thrive when you're the big boss. I really appreciate that. Wow. That actually is an incredible title to an essay.
Yeah.
Charlie's girl.
You can't get away with that today.
Yeah. What? You'd be surprised how many people say stuff like that. And you're like, did you just say that? What? I would love to, so I cannot believe we're out of time. We have we have 1 minute left, and I'm over here saying, we need a part two. We need a part two. We need a part two. So I'm going to ask you all, I've been given permission to go a couple of minutes over. Hopefully the public will be okay with that. But there's some great questions here. But one question is there a, if you could name people to watch? So this is I know we can get in trouble with this. So I'm just going to give everyone a very big blanket of generosity here, where everyone here should be forgiven for not mentioning someone that they would, under normal circumstances, if they had a pen in front of them, would include. But if there are there a couple of folks that one should watch? This is one of the great questions that came here. Who are the other women to watch in the field?
There are a lot.
There are a lot.
How many do you want to list?
Like, if you guys shouldn't even talk over each other, we'll just take our time 10 seconds, and you guys could just say names aloud. You don't even have to wait your turn.
Sarah Zwidi.
Gooch.
We know Courtney.
Julia Hoffman.
I don't know, all my students. It's impossible. Architects don't get to do stuff until they're in their 40s and 50s.
We should change that.
Yeah, I would say my colleagues, everybody I work with, both from my office or partnerships like Courtney Gooch that you mentioned. She's a good friend. Everybody that's just up and coming, trying to break boundaries and trying to break the way things are usually done and do them in a different way and be successful. It takes a while to get the exposure, but I think there's a lot of good fighters out there that are making their way.
Yeah. Okay,
one person I just want to flag, I mean, this is somebody that's been on the scene for a long time, but has not gotten her fair share, is Ava French. She's been around. She's not a youngster, but someone who has been so important in the curatorial scene and the education scene. And she's an architect as well, but someone who's going to keep making bigger marks, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a few people like Paula who used to work with us and have now started their own thing. Maura Rackcastle, Sarah Bainbridge is now one of the partners as Mass Design Group, who's an incredible, studio doing really innovative things as a nonprofit. Sarah Zwidi is a LAF fellow who's teaching at Harvard and actually rethinking Olmsted and all of his racist policies. And, people are just opening up, I think, all of these questions about what it means, especially in quote unquote public space, for it to be accessible, equitable, and because I think there's a bit of a neutrality sometimes that is, land is literally the opposite of neutral, right? It's like the least neutral thing that's possible. But in our world, in the architecture world, the landscape is seen as the stuff that is neutral. And so I think there's been, a really turning of its head generally, especially with both climate adaptation as well as equity. That's really changing, I think, the way that we all see space.
Yeah, I would add Mitch McEwen, activism and using platforms in a really intelligent way is great to get your politics out there and to succeed.
Yeah. I'm excited about, being able to be a place that can publish about a lot of this stuff. Like, how do you shape space? How do you create opportunities for this thinking to actually be codified in a way that people can come back to over and over again, because so much of this work is ephemeral. These conversations become fleeting. Liz, you have got to write about Charlie's Girl. Seriously, I want to interview you because it actually is that actually says it all on so many levels. I mean, and and I could actually see an interview even with this group documenting kind of like how they have at times felt like Charlie's Girl, if you will, and how you've actually had to go against making sure that you don't reify some of that. And so in saying that, I'm so devastated that this conversation has to end because I felt like we were just getting warmed up. I also want to say how much admiration I have for all of you. I am thrilled that we have a woman who is designing our 11 acres of green space here, Mia Lair. And so I'm so grateful that she is trotting out her good thinking and understanding of how to make place. I'm saying I because I feel selfish that I get to sit in conversation with you all. So thank you so much for this time. We have like 20 other questions that should be asked, and I'm not able to. So I'm just going to ask each of you in this last little quick moment, if you can very briefly, if you had to say what equity looks like for your field, like, I know that's a big question, but if you had to say, you had a moment on an elevator with someone, what would you say? And just quickly.
It's high school. Equity means exposing this field, this discipline to a broad range of the population. And, at a time when minds are forming, desires are forming, and yeah, that's what it means to me. It's early education.
Okay. Anyone else?
Building on that, I would say, and this notion that I was trying to get at in terms of just expanding our thinking in every way, like from how we do our research and analysis to our sources of inspiration to like material choices. I mean, I think there's all these things you're consciously deciding what you include and what you don't include. Like that's part of the design process. And I think by expanding like all of those ways of thinking, I think it will lead to, different decisions, as well as who you engage and how you engage them, especially for, public realm projects. So I think as that improves, and maybe it's back to this kind of, Liz, you had mentioned this kind of larger general trend of the collective, or more of the collective, maybe it's part of that there's more cooperation instead of competition. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think for me, equity is about celebrating differences and being proud of those differences. It's not about trying to blend in, or a woman trying to act like a man, or somebody trying to be neutral in their ethnicity or their background. It's about celebrating it, both in who you are as a professional and how through the narrative of design you bring that to the table, but also in understanding the differences of others, especially in public space and community, and how the public space itself can embrace that and be a distinguishing factor in what kind of space it is, how it is not a generic space, but one that's very tailored to those who use it.
Yeah. Paula, did you want to chime in here?
Well, I'm not going to talk about public space because I don't really.
Yeah, but equity, did you want to say?
On equity, I would say equity looks to me that the notion of sex, race, and any other form of difference is not relevant to the conversation. And what's relevant to the conversation is what you know, what you make, and what you're doing, and how you're dealing with people. And that the other stuff becomes irrelevant. When that happens, and sometimes it does, then you've hit the nirvana of it. Because you don't talk about women in design because you're talking just about design.
Yeah. So in the end, what I'm hearing is that equity is about leveling the playing field, so that everyone can participate at the same level and have the same resources, and not just access, but actually have the same shot at it. And I'm so excited about this conversation. I'm going to end by taking one of the questions and making it into a statement, because it's so good. I mean, it is really good, folks. So the question is, are the disappearing women finding ways to practice their profession other than by joining a firm? And so if we make that into a statement, our challenge is to create the space for disappearing women to find ways to practice their position and their profession in many ways. And I think you all are helping do that. So thank you so much. And